primary tool for exacting punishment. And this is a technological example of trying to fit the punishment with the crime.
Psychological torture is all about breaking down someone's spirit, really kind of taking away their sense of self, their sense of privacy, their sense of control over anything. And you've got the ultimate in that right here.
For the crime of homosexuality, the pair is placed inside the offending area of the body. Once again, the device expands by screw drive technology.
The third crime that the pair might be used for is ultimately with women who are accused of adultery, as having relationships with Satan in some form, prostitution, witches, or any other thing that a woman might be accused of. In that case, the pair would then be inserted into the vagina. It would puncture the uterus and would cause a tremendous amount of bleeding.
Eventually, it would pass the limits of what the mucosa or the lining of the soft tissues can tolerate.
This little thing, which looks pretty elegant and artistic, can cause you a whole host of problems. It's pretty sick.
There is, however, one potential saving grace with the pair of anguish. It may never have been used.
So there is some question of whether this has been used in the past and if it had enough power to be able to create bodily harm. So let's go ahead and test it. So we're going to use a simple sugar glass, and we're going to go ahead and insert it and expand it. Just in case it does work, we're going to put some safety gear on here. Let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to insert it. I'm going to slowly start tightening it. Now I'm actually going to hold the glass. There's a little crack. And as you can see, the weakest link of this entire mechanism is going to be the hinge on the top where it's very skinny. That actually pulled apart. The person that was doing it would have to put an incredible amount of force onto it, and it might just be more of a locking mechanism. Say if you put it in your mouth, it might just lock your jaw open.
The pair's technology is not without some merit. A similar tool, the modern-day medical speculum, enables doctors to expand surgical cavities so they can save lives rather than ruin them. Of all the machines of malice, there is one device that slices right to the core of fear and pain. They call it the pendulum. A pendulum is simply a weight called a bob, attached to the end of a rod or string that swings back and forth around a pivot point.
This machine is driven by gravity and its inertial forces. Inertia is basically the theory that a body in motion always stays in motion. The more mass you have, the harder it is to stop.
When the pendulum blade reaches its highest point, it creates potential or stored energy. When it drops, the weight creates kinetic energy, or energy in motion. As the blade swings back and forth, it should remain in motion.
That's the major part of inertia and inertia theory, is that it's always being acted upon by outside forces. And those outside forces are conspiring to slow that mass down.
These are the friction forces attempting to stop the swinging blade. Friction in the bearings of the pivot point, the air resisting against the rope, and the drag of the blade as it swings. There is skepticism about the effectiveness of this machine and whether it was even used. When Napoleon Bonaparte marched into Spain in 1808, his army liberated a prisoner who claimed he was scheduled to enter the pendulum chamber the next day.
During the Inquisition, the victim would lay on his back on this table, watching this massive blade swing back and forth, gradually getting closer and closer to his actual body, eventually cutting through your flesh, cutting through your bone, and cutting you in half through your heart.
Firstly, you'd go through skin and quite a bit of fat. Following that, you would go through the chest muscles, and eventually you would hit the sternum and the ribs. Once you've cut through the ribs, you have maybe about an inch to inch and a half until you get to the vital organs, being the heart and the lungs.
To maximize the length of the torture process, the pendulum blade slowly descends closer and closer. The prisoner experiences sheer terror and spills his guts before the blade gets a chance to do it for him. writer Edgar Allan Poe immortalized the psychological terror of the pendulum in his 1842 short story, The Pit and the Pendulum. He describes the mental anguish of a prisoner watching the blade swinging toward his heart.
You're looking up, looking at your doom coming towards you in increments. It's getting closer and closer to you. You're probably going to be willing to tell whoever's questioning you exactly what they want to hear.
Interrogators learned early on that the fear of torture is often more effective than the torture itself. Studies show that psychological torture produces the same degree of traumatic stress on victims as physical torture.
You go into a dentist's office and you know you're going to get a root canal. More than likely, you thinking about that pain is actually going to make the event more painful than if you hadn't thought about it at all.
With very little written about the pendulum, experts can only speculate about the mechanics that allow a giant metal blade to drop with painstaking precision.
Here we are standing next to the pendulum, which is constructed of a bracing system that goes across the top. And up there we have bearings. From the bearings coming down, the total weight of the blade and our center part is 59 pounds. So for them to actually use this properly, they would have to push this up as high as they could go and as straight as they could go in a perfect line. Otherwise, it'll run out of energy really quick.
If the pendulum is gear-powered, it operates like a giant mechanical clock. A basic grandfather clock uses weights to provide the energy needed to power the pendulum. As the weights drop, they pull down on a gearing system to power the swing. But without a mechanical part called an escapement, the weights would instantly drop down, rendering the clock useless. The escapement regulates the speed at which the weights drop. This way, the clock controls the force of gravity and gives the pendulum power for several days.
So when the pendulum slowly starts slowing down, it'll grab the gear to give it just enough energy to hit its arc again.
But with this torture device, the blade must act as its own weight. As it swings, it powers a set of interlocking gears that turns and lowers the entire device. Every time the blade reaches the arc of its swing, the pendulum system drops another notch. While this gear design explains how to methodically lower the blade, it does little to solve a much larger problem, the dissipation of inertia.
There's a couple forces here that are acting against you and trying to take the energy out of the system. One is the mechanism of a pivot point that's at the top. With that, you're going to create an actual friction force, which is trying to counteract the force of the pendulum swinging side to side. Second of all, when it's swinging through the air itself will actually try to stop this. So if we were to put a piece of meat on the table, what'll happen is as this is going back and forth and it starts gently slicing through the meat, we are also creating a friction force. The friction force is actually the blade cutting through the meat. So now we have three forces acting against us to try to stop this pendulum from swinging.
There's only one way to test the plausibility of a pendulum death machine. Observe how it cuts through meat.
As we swing the pendulum back and forth, we're also going to raise the meat slowly up in increments till this either stops or we cut the entire ham in half. Here we go. We're going to raise it up.
Even as it's going right now, there's enough drag. It doesn't look like it's going up quite as high as he lifted it. So it's already starting to slow down without even hitting anything. Okay. Oh boy.
A little more.
Keep going.
Back slice.
That's starting to hit it.
Okay.
Going.
A little more.
Oh, jeez.
A little more.
Yeah. And it's stuck.
And then it stopped.
It didn't even hit bone.
We did get about,
Inch and a quarter?
let's say about inch and a quarter, inch and a half cut. What would happen is once you hit a bone, you would increase the drag and your friction. So once this hit something solid, it would stop it much faster.
The sternum is a very strong bony structure. It's probably about